I'm Laura London, and you're listening to Speaking of Jung. Returning to us today for episode 146 is Jungian psychoanalyst Nancy Swift Furlotti. She holds a degree in Spanish language and literature from the University of Colorado Boulder and a degree in environmental design from the ArtCenter College in Pasadena. She later went on to earn a master's degree in clinical psychology at Antioch University in Los Angeles and a Ph.D. in psychology from Saybrook University. Dr. Furlotti trained as a Jungian psychoanalyst at the Research and Training Center for Depth Psychology in Zürich and at the C.G. Jung Institute of Los Angeles, where she later served as president. She is a founding member and past president of the Philemon Foundation and was actively involved in the publication of the Red Book. She served on the board of the Archive for Research in Archetypal Symbolism for many years, including the time it went online and published the Book of Symbols. She is a member of the Interregional Society of Jungian Analysts and the C.G. Jung Institute of Colorado and serves on the boards of the Pacifica Graduate Institute, the Smithsonian National Asian Museum, and the Aspen Festival and School. She is also a member of the Mercurius Film Prize Committee in Switzerland, where her current task is involvement with the producer of the documentary film There Is Another Way, which looks at the Combatants for Peace, an organization of Israelis and Palestinians working together in Israel-Palestine for peace. The film is available to rent or buy through Reconsider. Dr. Furlotti established and is involved with the Carl Jung Professorial Endowment in Analytical Psychology at the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA, and the Ariel Shalit Carlsberg Foundation Research Fellowship in Behavioral Neuroscience at Oxford University. In 2021, she presented the annual Fay Lecture Series at the Jung Center Houston, which was the subject of our first interview in episode 94. The lectures will be published as the book The Splendor of the Maya, A Journey into the Shadows at the Dawn of Creation by Texas A&M University Press on November 10th. In 2022, she presented Voices of Wisdom in Times of Crisis, Responding to the Cries of Nature at the Aranos Conference Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul in the 21st Century. Her lecture, as well as the others from the conference, were published in Volume 5 of the book series Jung's Red Book for Our Time. Also that year, she presented the Zürich lecture series The Lasting Relevance and Vision of Erich Neumann at the International School for Analytical Psychology in Zürich. It was later published as Eternal Echoes, Erich Neumann's Timeless Relevance to Consciousness, Creativity, and Evil, Volume 10 in the series by Chiron Publications. Her company, Recollections LLC, is devoted to promoting and supporting the publication of material related to the early development of analytical psychology. Recollections provided support for the publication of Erich Neumann's manuscripts, Jacob and Esau, as well as The Roots of Jewish Consciousness, Volume 1, Revelation and Apocalypse, and Volume 2, Hasidism, which have been published in English, Hebrew, and recently in German. She also participated in the publication of Dedicated to the Soul, The Writings and Drawings of Emma Jung, published by Princeton University Press on January 14th, and most recently, The Last Lectures, C.G. Jung, 1958, scheduled to be published by Chiron on July 26th in honor of Jung's 150th birthday. I've asked Dr. Furlotti to join us again today to discuss her essay, The Path to the Transcendent Function, Dreams, Visions, and Psychedelics, in the book Psychedelics and Individuation, Essays by Jungian Analysts, edited by Leslie Stein and Lionel Corbett, and published by Chiron Publications in late 2023. Dr. Furlotti will join us after these words. Speaking of Jung is a listener-supported show. Please consider joining our Patreon and subscribing to our YouTube channel. I am also here to remind you of the importance of recording your dreams. Temenos Dream is a revolutionary dream tracking app available for iOS and Android. Now you can record your dreams by speaking into your phone or typing them into the app. Search for myths, legends, and fairy tales related to the themes in your dreams. Use the new advanced AI interpretation with a focus on Jung's work, looking closely at symbols and associations to consider shadow, anima, animus, archetypes, and much more. Simply download the app and create a free account. Unlimited use is available with a premium subscription. Click on the link in the description box below or on our website, speakingofjung.com, where you will find links to everything discussed in this episode in the show notes. This interview is being recorded on Wednesday, July 9th, 2025, through the magic of Zoom. Hi, Dr. Swift-Furlotti.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a while.
It certainly has, but the world has changed pretty significantly since the last time we spoke, so there's probably a lot to talk.
Yes, it sure has. And I just want to mention at the top, since I initially asked you to do this episode, and while I was writing the introduction, I realized we had a lot of catching up to do. You've done so much since we last spoke. So let's start with that. Let's start with what's new in the Jungian world and what you've been up to. Since we last spoke, you presented the 2021 Fey Lecture Series, and it is going to be published as a book, The Splendor of the Maya, on November 10th.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Unfortunately, I have to say that publisher takes an awfully long time to get books out, but
yeah,
it's finally on its way, which is really exciting for me. That's a project I've been working on, my gosh, for so many years. The Splendor of the Maya, and my interest in the pre-classic Maya creation myth called the Popol Vuh, is something that I landed on after quite a number of years of studying all sorts of other mythology in Mesoamerica. And at quite a young age, I must have been an older teenager at the time, I started having dreams with very strange objects in them, snakes with two heads, and all sorts of unusual images. And I had no idea what those were or where they came from. And so as I started doing a little research on that, I discovered that those were images from Mesoamerica, symbols from Mesoamerica. And that's what really drew me into, first of all, living in Mexico one summer when I was 16, and then delving into Spanish. That really led me to my study and interest in Spanish literature, that culture. And I've been working on it for an awfully long time, recognizing that the Maya culture, pre-classic Maya culture, which is a very, very old culture, but it is as significant and was as substantial as Egypt or the Indus River Valley. Very sophisticated, very interesting, incredible mathematicians, astronomers, writers. They had a linguistic form that was super interesting. They also had a tremendous sense of humor. I mean, they really developed a very, very sophisticated culture right here in the Americas, and most people don't know about it. They have no idea that it was that early, that it was that huge. One of the largest pyramids in the world is from central Guatemala. This is all being uncovered now and revealed, but people are really not aware. We're all here in the United States, we're all very Eurocentric. And we focus on Egypt and Greece and China and India. But there was a huge culture here that was almost completely eradicated. And my sadness around that is that it is so sophisticated. It was so sophisticated. There's still so many Mayas still alive in the area that carry on that tradition that I really wanted to bring it to light. And the creation myth itself is really incredible. And in my book, I amplify that creation myth from a Jungian psychological point of view and go through a comparison with other creation myths and with the idea of showing the reality of the collective unconscious and archetypes and how the similarities across cultures, even when cultures had no connection to each other. The Mesoamerica was completely isolated from the rest of the world. And yet the symbols and the images and the mythology that emerge has tremendous similarities with what has emerged throughout the rest of the world. And so it in many ways supports Jung's hypothesis, or it's not even a hypothesis anymore, his belief in the collective unconscious and the archetypal patterns. And so I also think that it brings psychology, Jungian psychology, into anthropology and archaeology, which is not the case. That tends to be very empirically based. And so, as you and I talked about briefly before, this is another area where I felt it was important to bring in the psychological understanding.
Yeah.
So through this myth as a way of showing how the myth is actually the basis for the development of the ideals for how these individuals in that community are to live and how the whole community was developed. It's kind of a template of ethics and relationship to the gods. And that seems to be the case with creation myths in general. So anyways, I've just found it immensely fascinating and kind of been in a continuing thread in the background of my work from my teenage years until now. And I'm just delighted to finally be able to have this book published and to start having some conversations about this incredible civilization that exists on our own continent.
Wow. And you discovered all of that because you paid attention to your dreams.
Exactly. And I grew up in Los Angeles, which is an area that used to be part of Mexico. It's called Alta California. And it has actually, there was a trade between the early Maya and different areas in the United States and communication. And we don't fully know the extent of that back and forth, but the influence, it feels to me, it's always felt to me like it was right there in the soil where I lived. And of course, Southern California has a huge population from Central America and South America.
Yeah.
And so all those people bring that reality with them. Even though when the Catholics came in and tried to completely eradicate their religion, their culture, they basically transformed their beliefs, kind of merged their own belief system in with Catholicism, and added different saints and things. So it was a not such a difficult transition for them. But the basis of that original religion and that mythology is still very much present. And I could feel it. It felt like it just came up from the roots out of the soil. And I was affected by it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would imagine a lot of other people are too, and they may not even realize it.
Yeah.
I must have been open to that,
Mm-hmm.
and curious too. You discover these very odd images and symbols in your dreams, and you have no idea what that is, and you either dismiss it and forget it, or you're gripped by it, and you try to figure out why these are coming out of your psyche. So it's been a lifetime of exploration for me in trying to understand the cultures, and then of course recognizing the significance of the cultures. The Maya were very early on, and then that civilization diminished about 250, 300 AD, and completely collapsed in central Guatemala in about 900, and then they moved to Yucatan and other places, and then other groups emerged in Mexico and in those areas, and then finally the Aztecs arose, and that's what we're most familiar with down
Mm-hmm.
there. But that was much later, and they weren't as long lasting by any means as the Maya were. And then of course the Spanish came in, and that was the end of the whole game.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
which is very sad to me, because just the writings, the size of the civilization, for example, pre-classic in central Guatemala, in the Mirador Basin, there were about 411 cities down there, with about 900 little communities around it. I mean, it was massive, absolutely massive. And they were able to create a means of survival in a rainforest, which usually has terrible soil and not much can grow. But that area they discovered down there actually was called a kirst, and it had a kind of a rock embankment around it that surrounded it, which helped keep the water in pools in that area. So they had plenty of water, and then they would take the topsoil from the pools and put it on the areas, the agricultural areas, and they had extremely fertile areas to grow all sorts of things. And those people originally, way back then, the average height was up to about 6'2", from like 5'8" to 6'2". I mean, they were so healthy that they it really manifested in the health of the individuals. And then they had these trade routes with kind of freeway-like system that went all over. It's pretty remarkable, and yet it's completely forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm.
It really shouldn't be. The Spanish burned all but 4 of their books. Throughout that whole area, there were only about 4 codices left, and it's just it's a sad piece of history, that's for sure. But it's a piece of history that I think is really important to remember and to honor.
And you do that, and you do that with your lectures and now the publication of this book. So,
yeah, that's right. So when the book comes out, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. If a lot of the when I really got into this material, there really wasn't too much about, well, hardly anything about psychology, but there was a bit about an understanding of the comparative religions and of the areas, and an understanding of the spirituality of the people and all of that. And that was really important to me. But most of it most of what you read about those areas is just very technical. It's very fact-based. And that's interesting and that's helpful. But they had such a vibrant sense of spirit and connection to the gods. It was just so completely alive in that respect that that's really the part that I want to bring out.
mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah, we've lost that for the most part.
Yeah, we have. We've totally lost that. We absolutely have. I just hope people will find an interest in this and just recognize the significance of this incredible culture that existed for so many years and still exists in a much lower paced way in that area and among all those people still.
The following year, you presented at the ARAS conference. You presented the paper Voices of Wisdom in Times of Crisis, Responding to the Cries of Nature. And all of those lectures were published in Volume 5 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time. And I was hoping you would tell us a little bit about that and if it tied in at all with your research on the Maya.
It all does. I mean, the Maya piece is so fundamental to everything I think about that it is brought in. Now this paper, of course, takes me, and I have written other papers on the environment and the way we treat our environment and the way we don't pay attention to it, and the Maya collapse actually occurred because the Maya began to neglect their relationship with nature, and they began to use a lot of plaster on their pyramids, which were absolutely massive and huge, and a lot of plaster on their freeway system. They went from a few inches to about 15 inches in covering everything. And in the process, they had to cut down a lot of the rainforest trees to burn those at a very high temperature to be able to create this particular type of plaster. And a lot of the runoff went into their pools of water and created kind of a cement top on the pools of water, so they were not able to get the topsoil from those pools or have access to a lot of the water. So everything collapsed quite quickly, and that's when the Maya had to move to other areas because they wouldn't survive in that Mirador Basin any longer. And so if we take that as a reference point to what's going on now in the environment, for us, we're watching our own environment collapse. Nature is changing so radically. I mean, just recently that horrible flooding in Texas that has killed so many people people, including so many children. I mean, it's just every week or so, or every month, we wake up to a new catastrophe like that from nature. And we realize that we have contributed to this. At least some of us do. Most of us do. And especially now, it seems like we're not moving ahead to try to slow down our negative contributions to our environment. It's just getting worse and worse, and it's going to get worse and worse. And Mother Nature is going to get more and more vicious and more angry about it. It's going to win in the end. And we are not. And so the big lesson for me is to recognize that this actually happened to the early Maya, that they contributed to the destruction of their environment, and they were forced to move. That's one example. But and for us right now, this is happening across the entire globe. It's not just one small area in the world. This is global. So this is very serious. And we're just not paying attention to it the way we should. And I'm brought back to a couple of quotes by Jung, who especially you said you were very interested in these last lectures of Jung's that he gave in 1958.
Yes.
In Zürich. And I was a participant in this in terms of helping to fund this project through my company Recollections, which is a company that Arel Shalit and I set up years ago to publish first-generation Jungian material that had never been published before. And so that's what I continue to focus on, and this is one project that I was very excited to be a part of. But it's very interesting because he also talks about, again, the fact that he doesn't fully believe that human beings have the capacity to become fully conscious, and that we're not even close to becoming fully conscious, or as conscious as we have the potential to be. And he has this there was a question asked in here about the developmental capacity of the human being, and he talks about that there, which is very, very interesting. And so I think what we're seeing now is very glaringly with what's going on in the environment is our lack of capacity to really embrace a longer view. We don't really consider what's coming down the path in 20, 50, 100 years, 150 years. What we do now has an effect on this long time frame. We think about what's going to happen in the next maybe 5 years or so, and that's about it. And that's really a shame. It's very, very sad. It's very, very sad to me that is the case.
The capacity for our development to become more conscious is not a priority in most people's lives.
No, it's really not. It's really not a priority, and it's not completely understood, and it also becomes something to be afraid of. Delving into the unconscious is a pretty terrifying affair. And a lot of people just don't want to do that. They'd rather stay on the surface as opposed to really go down into the depths to actually, first of all, begin to see and acknowledge those aspects of themselves that are not so pleasant. Elements of anger, resentment, greed, selfishness, envy, all the shadow that exists in the unconscious for individuals. The culture has its own shadow that has to be dealt with too, and then it's all connected with our own very specific complexes that were created when we developed, and whatever families we were in and whatever cultures we were in. And there's a lot to understand about ourselves individually, to become what Jung always talks about as whole, to follow that individuation process. And I think a lot of people are reluctant to do that because it is very challenging. It's really, really very, very hard. He was so smart to relate it to alchemy, because that's really gives you an overview of what you have to contend with when you really are on that path of individuation. I mean, you have to go down into the negredo. You have to, which is total darkness, and then you frequently are completely torn apart.
Yeah.
You die, and then hopefully you will be reborn. But there are long periods where you have no idea what's happening to you. You are completely in the dark. You just have to sit there and tolerate it. That's a piece of what I got into in that paper at ARAS. I talked about a dream that I had where I descended into the darkness underground, and I was completely lost. It was dark. I couldn't find my way. I had no idea. I was terrified of some of the figures around me at that point. And I just had to endure it, which is what the experience is. It's really like, for a woman especially, sitting on an egg and incubating an egg until it's ready to hatch. It doesn't hatch when I want it to hatch. It hatches when it's ready to hatch. And so we have to be very patient. And in that process, then new things can emerge, and will emerge if we stay with it long enough. And then there is a transformation, and that transformation has to do with a new viewpoint, a new attitude, a new understanding about ourselves, a new capacity to hold more of ourselves, and a capacity to hold more of the collective unconscious also. And of course, that gets into the whole discussion around evil, our own evil, and the evil that is inherent in the collective unconscious, and those pieces, and how important it is for each individual to help make that more conscious.
Let's get into that. The next item on my list here, going chronologically, is the 2022 Zürich lecture series, which you presented at ISAP Zürich, titled The Lasting Relevance and Vision of Erich Neumann, and it was later published by Chiron as the book Eternal Echoes, Erich Neumann's Timeless Relevance to Consciousness, Creativity, and Evil. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it ties into what you were just saying?
Erich Neumann, of course, was an early Jungian analyst, He grew up in Berlin and went to school in Germany, and in 1933 graduated from medical school. But that was the same year that the Nazis implemented the Jewish laws. So he was not able to get his medical degree. He wasn't able to do an internship or a residency or anything. And so seeing the writing on the walls, he took his family and moved to Palestine. And in the process, he stopped in Zürich and got into analysis with C.G. Jung, and continued a very, very strong, meaningful friendship with C.G. Jung until the very end of his life, which unfortunately was quite early. He died at 55. He was 30 years younger than Jung, but and Jung died 6 months later. But he was a brilliant thinker. He was somebody who had a very strong connection to the feminine, and that's how I became really fascinated with him very early on, because he seemed to really understand the feminine, which way more so than Jung did. There was a sense about that. Of course, he wrote the Great Mother and the compilation, The Fear of the Feminine, and Amor and Psyche, and he really delved into it. So I found him endlessly interesting. And again, he's another individual who hasn't been given the credit he deserves. He had a very hard time being an early Jungian and participating in the Zürich Institute because they felt that he was moving ahead of Jung, or trying to move ahead of Jung, when in fact he was bringing in original ideas and things that actually challenged Jung. One specifically was his book, Psychology and the New Ethic, which he wrote during the war, trying to understand what was going on in Nazi Germany and what was going on in the psyche of individuals in a country where he grew up and felt so comfortable and so welcome for so long, and then things radically changed.
Yeah.
And so, of course, that's where his striving to understand what evil is, the concept of evil, and he really delved into that, which is just so fascinating. Anyway, he moving to Palestine, he took on the task of trying to establish himself physically and psychologically in his land, the Jewish land, his new land. And so in the process, he wrote what is now called The Roots of Jewish Consciousness. And in English, it's in 2 volumes, Volume 1, Revelation and Apocalypse, and Volume 2, Hasidism. So he went through the history of Judaism, mostly for himself, to really give himself a solid foundation and understanding. He'd been a pretty secular Jew in Germany, as many of them were. And this took him through the war, and he had intended to write a third part, which had to do with the psychology, looking at this from a Jungian psychological perspective. he does incorporate a lot of that, especially in the second volume, but he never actually managed to write that. I think he just stopped. I think he just was so overwhelmed by the experience of World War II and what had happened that he just needed to put that away, um, for his own sake, and kind of delve further into psychology and get his life established and his practice and everything else. One cannot even imagine now the trauma of that experience.
Yeah.
It was absolutely overwhelming. But he did write about it, and it's truly fascinating. So Arel Shalit actually found these manuscripts in a chicken coop behind a Jungian society in Israel. He was president for a while, group, and there were all sorts of papers kind of out there being stored, and of course he took them and preserved them, and then we decided we were going to get those published along with Jacob and Esau, which we got published first, which was another book manuscript that Neumann had written but hadn't gotten published. And so we did manage to do that and got it published by Routledge in English, and then had it published in Hebrew in Israel, with a couple of Israelis who took over the task of editing it and did a fantastic job on that. And then I ran into a guy at a conference, and then the second time I saw him, he was at that ARAS conference where I presented that paper, and he really wanted to get this published in German. So it's just come out in German.
Oh, nice.
Which is very exciting.
Yeah.
And it really meant a lot to him. It helped him find his roots in Judaism, being German. So be very meaningful. And after the Congress this August, I'm going to Frankfurt, Germany, and we're going to have a discussion and a panel talking about the roots of Jewish consciousness in German and in English. So that'll be very interesting. It's nice that this book is doing the full round of places where Erich Neumann has lived.
Oh,
anyway,
great.
My book, Eternal Essence, Erich Neumann's Timeless Relevance to Consciousness, Creativity, and Evil. I wrote that as a way of, first of all, recognizing that Neumann is very difficult to read. A lot of people have mentioned that to me. And he doesn't seem to be as well read as I would certainly like him to be. And so I thought, I'm going to present kind of a bit of a synopsis of most of his books, and to give people an opportunity to understand what each of these books is about, and then they can go on, if they have a particular interest, and delve more deeply into the original. And so it's kind of an overview of his opus, covers a lot of his different material. And he was of course, very interested in all of these areas. Consciousness is a huge one. The Origins and History of Consciousness that he wrote. It's probably one of his most well-read books. And then the Great Mother. And then he really got into the psychological development of humans from day one until the very end. So it's really a longitudinal study of the development of human psychological development throughout his work. And he really got into it in great detail where Jung didn't. So he contributed tremendously. Then he also has a lot of books on creativity and a lot of material on creativity. He was very interested in writers and musicians and artists, and he talks about the nature of creativity and where that resides in the human psyche, and also the difference between the creative individual and the individual who is not as creative. There's a psychological difference there. The creative individual has a much more flexible boundary between consciousness and unconsciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, that also raises a danger for them, which we see in the fact that a lot of very creative individuals end up committing suicide or going crazy because they've delved deeply into the unconscious, and without a super strong and resilient ego, it's easy to lose oneself and be consumed by the darker energies of the unconscious. So I found that extremely interesting. And then, of course, he talks a lot about evil, which is what he explored in depth in the Roots books, and then went on to talk about that in terms of ethics and human ethics, and that book was very, very controversial when it came out, because what he's talking about is that each individual needs to be responsible for their own sense of ethics and morality, that it's an internal experience that comes directly from the psyche, the greater self. What is right, what is wrong, what is okay and what is not. That it's not necessarily just a dogma, a religious dogma that tells you what is right and what is wrong. That each individual needs to be responsible for their own ethics. And that was controversial because a lot of the early Jungians at the Jung Institute in Zürich felt that he was bringing in such a radical new idea that contradicted what they all knew in their own religions,
right?
That they weren't happy about that at all. And so that book actually took a very long time to get published. But it also created very interesting conversations with Jung on this very topic, the topic of ethics, and also the topic of evil. Of course, evil is present everywhere in us, in the collective, and it's up to us to see it, and it's up to us to make choices about how we handle that, what we do with it, whether we act it out, whether we don't, whether we learn something from it, whether we incorporate it into our consciousness and carry it consciously, and ultimately, in a deeper sense, how that our ability to deal with that helps God become more conscious of its own evil, and God being the wholeness, God being the name for that essence, the self, the unnameable, whatever anybody wants to call it. It's the ultimate wisdom of the psyche. That is positive, negative, good, bad. It carries all opposites, which clearly include evil, and that has to be dealt with. And humans have the capacity to bring that into consciousness and carry it consciously, which then helps God see that peace in itself. And that's what Jung got into in Answer to Job. And the conversations around that between Jung and Neumann and those concepts are very interesting. And you can read that in their letters. And Jung was changed. His concepts deepened through that conversation with Erich Neumann on that particular issue, the issue of evil. And it's very, very interesting. And of course, we don't go around thinking of evil. Nobody wants to think that they carry any bits of evil within themselves, and they don't want to see evil in the world. It's usually scapegoated,
Right.
and that's what the Jews would do early on. They would try to take whatever was evil and unacceptable and put it on the back of a goat and send that goat outside the city walls to get rid of it. That's the basis, the fundamental basis of projection, which is so prevalent.
Yes.
We don't talk about it very much, but it really is ever present, and we see it more and more. I mean, that is kind of the basis for our whole cultural setup right now.
Mm-hmm.
The politics and everything is projection from one side to the other, and there's no bridging that gap. There's no understanding where the middle is there. There's no understanding that each side carries their own difficulties and their own evil components. It's all just being projected. Everything's just being projected everywhere, which is really, really very upsetting. And this is the situation we're in. And that's probably why Jung recognized that humans' ability for consciousness was limited.
Yes.
We keep falling back on these into these more, you could say, primitive states of mind. I hate to even use the word primitive because it's such an inherent part in ourselves that it still exists. So anyways, I found Neumann's writing to be so thought-provoking, and I've learned so much that I just wanted to stimulate an interest, not only in our community, but in anybody who's interested in religion, mythology, gets into all of those things and these various topics. I mean, who talks about evil these days?
Right.
We need to talk about evil.
Yes.
Or not purely in the sense of projection. Neumann had an amazing dream early on that allowed him to recognize that he was looking at evil. He was looking through an eye in his own forehead that was connected to God, that allowed him to see the depth of who God is, and the depth of goodness and evil. And of course, what individuation is all about is understanding both of those and finding the points in between that allow for a new attitude towards this to emerge, the transcendent function, which is what his dream was all about. It's finding that transcendent function where he could hold the balance between those opposites, between all opposites. And that's not what we're seeing culturally happening anymore. I mean, there was there was a burst when Jung was still alive, where a burst of interest and hope, and it just seems to have pulled back. I'm hoping we can find it again. I remember Jung did say that in the shift from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, there would be tremendous turmoil for about 300 years, and then there would be further transformation and growth. It feels like we're in that period of complete chaos and turmoil right now.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the transcendent function, and you had also mentioned it earlier, which leads us to our next topic, which is the essay that you wrote that was published in the book Psychedelics and Individuation. And your chapter is titled The Path to the Transcendent Function: Dreams, Visions, and Psychedelics. And I found so much of interest in this chapter. And I know we don't have a lot of time left here today, but I would like you to tell us a little bit about that essay. I mean, I highly encourage people to have a look. This book is filled with essays, all written by Jungian analysts, and yours covers Jung's visions, your own personal psychedelic experiences, the neuroscience of the brain, how to work with the images. Also, you look at the potential dangers in using psychedelics. And I'd like to ask you, since I have you here, there seems to be some controversy as to whether or not Jung himself took psychedelics. I've heard people argue it both ways. He has, he hasn't. And I did find a letter in volume 2 of the letters where he says, I have never taken the drug myself. So, well, he was referring to mescaline. I was wondering what your take was on that.
Yeah, no, I know that letter, and I understood that letter to be a warning to the individual he was writing to. And he took a pretty strong stance against psychedelics. But there is evidence in other letters and materials that indicate that he did try psychedelics. And I had a conversation quite a number of years ago with Sonu Shamdasani on this topic, and he confirmed that there were indeed indications that Jung did try psychedelics. And it wouldn't have surprised me one bit, because that was at a period of time when everybody was trying. All the psychologists, researchers were trying psychedelics. It was new. It was interesting. It was experimental.
Mm-hmm. So let me just ask you this. So even in conservative Switzerland, do you think that that's...
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In Switzerland, that's where Hoffman developed LSD in Switzerland.
Well, I meant, but Jung's background and the way he was raised and stuff, I just didn't consider.
No,
Okay.
Jung was the most curious person alive.
Okay.
I mean, he was, this was something new. They were all talking about it. It wouldn't have surprised me one bit. He was totally curious. He worked at the Berkeley Mental Hospital and treated people with different psychoses, and those people were lost in the unconscious. And so, his curiosity around that was tremendous, trying to understand that. And what psychedelics does is open that door to that place. And so I could see very, very easily how Jung would want to have that experience, because it was an experience that probably in many ways was not so dissimilar from some of the visions that he had spontaneously. It was unbelievably easy for him to drop into a vision of the unconscious. And as many times as I've tried to do that, there's no way I can. He was really remarkable in that sense. He could hold on to his ego and still descend into the unconscious. We see in the red and in a lot of the visions that are documented. So his sense of curiosity about that, at least in my mind, would have led him to at least try it and then be part of the discussion around that. And he came to the conclusion that, I'm sure, while it was okay for him and very interesting, it may have presented a real danger to a lot of his patients or people who didn't have a substantial enough ego to be able to tolerate that door being opened to the unconscious. So he came out with a very strong warning against doing that. And of course, in that letter, he's talking to some man about that, and he's not going to say, "Oh yeah, sure, go out and try LSD. You'll find it really interesting." He's a medical doctor. He's not going to take that risk at all. He didn't know that man well enough to know whether that man had any psychosis, latent psychosis or psychosis in the family, or actually how resilient his ego was. And so it was the responsible thing to say. But I think that it's pertinent to his conversation with that man. I don't think that it's necessarily what he would say in every case. And I think he was just too curious not to. And there is evidence, as Sonu Shamdasani pointed out to me in his writings, that he indeed did try psychedelics. And in my paper, I go through especially one of his images. Well, first of all, I talk about the nature of the psychedelic image. When you're in a psychedelic experience, it's been documented that there are very specific images that appear in that experience, and different colors, and how the colors migrate and stretch and change, and objects change their shapes, and let me see if I can find exactly what it is. I might not be able to because it might take too much time, but it's, for example, described as beautiful crimson, purples, violets, blues, and greens, quickly succeeding one another. The background of this gorgeous color panorama was first like faintly illuminated ground glass with a silvery tint, deepening into a yellow like pure gold. The whole picture materialized and changed and became more solid and more real. You go through just how it changes and the waves and the experience of it. And in some of his own descriptions of his dreams and the way he talks about things has all of those elements in it. And so it seems to really support the fact that he had that experience. He knew exactly what that experience was. And it's interesting to see that. And even some of it in I can't find that right now in this paper specifically. Anyway, when people read this, they'll be able to see that his descriptions are totally seem to be totally representative of a psychedelic experience. So that, at least in my mind, is more proof of the fact that he had that experience and knew what that was all about. It's a door, the psychedelic experience is really a door into the unconscious, and it can be the path to the transcendent function. That's why I titled my paper in that way, because it opens you. If you really have the experience, it has to be set up properly. You've got to know what you're getting into. It has to be in relation to somebody who is a facilitator. And we Jungians got together at this conference at Pacifica to talk about whether the Jungian community would be able to assist in this new development. And I believe we are, because we understand how to deal with symbols, images, and emanations from the unconscious, which is what people experience in the psychedelic experience. And we can help them integrate what that means for them personally and collectively. So we're almost the best suited group in the psychological world, because we do understand all this. And this is how we work. We work with dreams, we work with visions, and that's exactly what the psychedelic experience is. And in my paper, I show the similarities in what happens in the brain between dreams, visions, and psychedelics.
Yeah.
And it's the same. The neurotransmitters are activated in similar ways. And so we're dealing with the same material. So anyways, I think I lost track of what I was actually going to say.
That was the point in your paper that really struck me the most, is how Jungian analysts, you say, are uniquely trained to understand the symbolic, the archetypal meaning of these elements that appear in the visions, and how to work with them as part of one's individuation process. And my concern is with people dabbling in having these experiences, not with a guide, just going in there alone and then coming out, and then what? And not, as you say, integrating these experiences. So what are the dangers?
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, they're huge dangers. First of all, the biggest piece there is that it could be a fun experience, but it doesn't go any further than that. It's just a fun experience. And in the paper, I talk about a number of my own experiences, starting early on when I was about 16 years old with psychedelics. And I mean, it was terrifically fun. It was, and through college, it was a way for us groups of us to get together and go out and have a really fun time. But material was not integrated. And so a lot of times it became, especially for me with LSD, it became very scary towards the end of the trip, and very, very rational and heady and paranoid. And as I mentioned, I also had an experience where a friend of mine, while we were taking LSD at a rock concert, became pretty hysterical and paranoid, and she ended up falling into schizophrenia. Never emerged. That overtook her for the rest of her life, and it was a very, very sad experience.
Because you've had this experience, I do want to ask you, Is that a potential for happening to anybody, or was that there and she activated? Was it within her all the time? You said that she became schizophrenic and never recovered, because I've heard of that happening. And I've always been curious about whether the drug did that and did that permanent damage or activated something that was already there.
I believe that it activated something that was already there. There was a latent psychosis, which she was not, and the experience, the intense experience of the unconscious was the trigger that activated the schizophrenia. Now, it's very possible that it would have been activated in another way, or it would have emerged naturally because it was there. I don't know. But what I do know is that she was perfectly normal up to that point.
Oh,
and
boy.
then after that experience, she was not. And so that's why it is so important that people respect psychedelics, either a Jungian or another therapeutic practitioner who is working with somebody who has a desire to do this, knows what the strength, the resilience of the personality is, the person's ego, whether there's any psychosis in the family, whether they've ever had any kind of a psychotic experience before. And that was Jung's big concern. That's why he said, don't do it, because there is that danger to be overwhelmed by the unconscious. And you certainly don't want that to happen. Now, the other thing I mentioned in my paper is that I do have psychosis, serious psychosis in my family. I've got a lot of bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. And so I might not, at this point, be one of those people where they want to recommend that. But luckily, I had enough resilience and enough capacity to hold on to a sense of consciousness while I was deeply embedded in the unconscious, and I was okay. I had fun, and then I really learned from it. And that's the point that's so important right now to know about psychedelics. When so many people are suffering from depression and anxieties and addictions and post-traumatic stress disorder and all sorts of early trauma issues, and people who are suffering from cancer and are moving towards the end of their lives. And I mean, there's so many people out there who need help, but we don't have the resources to help them very substantially. And the SSRIs and all the other pharmaceutical drugs that we give people, they help reduce symptoms, but they don't really solve the problems.
Right.
And so this is potential. Psychedelics have been shown to actually have the potential to really help, for example, the veterans who have really intense PTSD and trauma. I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. The numbers of people who were healed. There was also a very recent bit of research that has come out that has to do with a group of religious people, priests, pastors, taking psychedelics. These were people who'd never taken it before, who work in their religious fields, in their religions, and they had not had an experience of revelation or an experience of the deep religious psyche that they longed for. And they took psychedelics. I can't remember exactly which one it was. It might have been MDMA or psilocybin. And the percentage of them right after the fact described having a once-in-a-lifetime experience of the numinous, of God, something that they had read about in mystics, but had never actually had that experience. And as time went on, they were tested right after the fact, given a survey, and then about 6 months later, and then even after that, and a very high number up in the 70s and the 80s, percentage-wise, maintained that sense of awe that from that experience, and it changed their relationship to their spirituality. And it was like a blessing for them. It's a very interesting bit of research, and I'm sure you can find it somewhere online. But they have the potential to change your point of view. And so for people who are at the end of their lives and they're terrified, it has the potential to help them understand that the transition from life to death is not necessarily a terrifying experience. It's a welcoming experience. It's a positive experience, and it can be a very enlightening experience for them. And the same with people who are suffering from cancer, to help them see it in a different way. What psychedelics do is that they cause the brain to open an area that corresponds to our brain when we were adolescents, where we were very open and very curious, and we would take in new information, and we would process information in a new way and change our viewpoints. And so it opens the brain once again and allows the individual to take in new information, to reprocess things, to create a new view for themselves of life and a new view of who they are. And that is basically the transcendent function. It's bringing all aspects of ourselves together in a new way and finding what Jung referred to as the third way, not the first or the second, but it's the new way of seeing ourselves and seeing the world. And that's why it's so important when somebody does take a psychedelic that they process it thoroughly with a Jungian analyst or with somebody who's capable of understanding the vision and helping that individual integrate that to create a new path forward for them. And the window in the brain only remains open between 1 week and 3 weeks after they take the drug, depending on which drug they take. So it has to be worked on right away. And that's extremely important in the process of managing patients who want to undergo this. And that was discussed at the conference. And what we basically pulled together was how to deal with this from start to finish and be completely ethically responsible and knowledgeable about what needs to be done in order to make this a successful experience for our patients. Psilocybin is legal in Colorado and Oregon And I think that's about it. But the state of Colorado, for example, where I live, has put certain guidelines on how it's used and where it's used and the whole thing. And that's not necessarily the way the Jungian community would organize it. But
Right.
we'll see how this plays out. And we've had a very hard time getting MDMA legalized. It went through the FDA and it was rejected. So they're trying again to get that. They're starting with MDA to get that legalized across the board. So it's very slow going, but it has the potential. It has huge, huge potential for healing and transformation, and for the whole world of mental health. That's a positive.
I want to thank you for your time and for sharing all of this with us. On this episode, there will be links to everything Dr. Swift-Furlotti has mentioned in the show notes on speakingofjung.com's episode page and in the description box below. So thank you again for your time and your openness and your willingness to share.
Well, thank you for having me, Laura. It's been a very interesting conversation. I've enjoyed it very much.
Thank you again. Speaking of Jung is not just a podcast, it is also a website. Please visit speakingofjung.com, where you will find extensive information on the life and work of C.G. Jung, show notes and audio downloads for all of our 168 episodes, a comprehensive books page, a blog, and now a monthly email newsletter, which you can sign up for at the bottom of our front page. All of our episodes are also available on YouTube podcasts, which you can access by subscribing to our channel, Jungian Laura. It's free. Just click the subscribe button. I created Speaking of Jung almost 10 years ago. Next month is our 10th anniversary, and all of our content is still free to access, but it is not free to produce. Please consider contributing to our tip jar on Patreon for just $5 a month, or visit our support page at speakingofjung.com/support for links on all the ways you can help keep this podcast and our website alive. So with special thanks to Leslie Stein, to Patricia Preisner, and to Chiron Publications, I am Laura London, and you've been listening to Speaking of Jung.